Welcome to Inform Kenya, the Nairobi Baptist Civic Education video series. We're glad that you were able to join us again. Our guest today is a member of the NBC congregation and also a member of our preaching team. He is an advocate of the High Court and a senior counsel, and amongst other things, he's also the Chancellor of Kirinyaga University. Welcome, Dr. Fred Ojiambo.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's normal and acceptable for lawyers to be involved in politics, but is it okay for Christian lawyers to engage in politics?
Well, first of all, I think, yes, it is normal for lawyers to be involved, mainly because of their training. And politics has a lot to do with justice and law and management of all that. And so lawyers will be likely candidates for that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think the fact that one is a Christian lawyer doesn't stop them from getting involved in politics. Mm-hmm. And I think Christian lawyers ought to be involved in politics. Now, that's an important question, because the question is, what does it mean to be involved in politics? Mm-hmm. I think since it talks about governance, talks about how people relate to each other, that's what politics is all about. Mm-hmm. And therefore it talks about rights and freedoms and how you manage all those relationships. I think it's right that Christians ought to be involved, because Christians, I think above all else, must be people who are concerned with right governance, justice, and how laws are done, because laws are meant to be instruments of managing peace and relationships in society. So Christians ought to be involved. Whether they ought to be involved in competitive politics, it's a different issue. It doesn't mean there shouldn't be, but there are issues that one must consider when one gets into that.
Okay. What then do, in your view, what do Christian lawyers bring on the table when it comes to their engagement in politics?
I think, first of all, they bring to the table their faith. They are Christians, and therefore they believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and they also bring the whole counsel of God. God is concerned about our lives, concerned about how we live with other people, concerned about justice, is concerned about love, about looking to the other person. And so they bring that to the table. Politics has a lot to do with justice, with law. And so when Christians come in, they bring a dimension, in my view, which is far greater than just the law, because the law is really the minimum. Justice is far much bigger than law. And so the Christians, I think, when they bring their faith to bear on issues of society, which politics is all about, then they bring a dimension which, in my view, at any rate, others don't bring.
Okay. Yeah. I presume that the Christian Lawyers Fellowship has membership all over Kenya. In what ways does this fellowship positively impact the political arena?
Well, first of all, the Christian Lawyers Fellowship, yes, as you quite rightly say, has membership throughout the country. And what we try to do is to influence how governance is done, influence the legislative process, so that when, as you know now, for instance, that no piece of legislation should be able to go through without public participation.
Yes.
But one of the things that Christian lawyers do is to ensure that that public participation is real and not just notional. We look at pieces of legislation, critique them, and make our views known to the legislature. The committee in Parliament, which deals with legislation, and we make our views known so that the input of Christianity and the input of justice and the law of God, so to speak,
Yes.
is contained and infused in pieces of legislation that go through. That's one. Secondly, the Christian Lawyers Fellowship tries to engage the public in explaining to the public what pieces of law, what the piece of legislation and regulations are about. Because it's quite easy for people who are so busy doing all sorts of things not to think about how the impact of the legislation that comes through. And quite a lot of nefarious things can be sneaked into society through legislation, and so we try to educate the public and explain the public mainly through congregations like churches and sometimes town hall situations. So that's what we try to do, and of course we lobby as well. We try to lobby for and against moves by either government or legislature or other bodies in society and authorities to try and get just provisions in our regulations.
So for an ordinary voter or an ordinary Kenyan, if they're concerned about a particular piece of legislature, then they can actually look for the Christian Lawyers Fellowship within their county or within their community, town, and get help.
Absolutely. And that's really what ought to be. What we've tried to do is to make ourselves visible so that people know we exist and so people can come to us. And I think any voter should be able to come and seek advice or seek direction and guidance, and we'll be quite happy to do that, yes.
Okay. Well, it's actually good to hear that it's quite a wide kind of engagement.
Yeah.
The elections, the period after elections is usually heavily legal, for lack of a better expression.
Yes.
How can Christian lawyers impact that period in just immediately after the elections?
Well, as you know, as you quite rightly put it, I mean, it's immediately after, but as you know, even before. Yeah. Now we're running up to the elections, and already we have pre-election legislation, not legislation, but pre-election litigation going on, and all sorts of litigations going on. Some of it intended to impede the election or to ensure that a certain playing field is put in place, but much more so after, because that's when we have all the election petitions and all that. I think at that time, I think the players are usually very few. Yeah. The public are not really involved in that so much. It's more the lawyers who go into court, who either act for the petitioners or those who are running the elections like the IEBC, or those who are interested parties like the state. And so it's really a very narrow area of engagement after the elections, because it's mainly the professionals who are fighting cases. The public are only involved as witnesses and people like that. But I think still the Christian lawyers can be involved either in litigation themselves, because that doesn't stop you. I mean, the Christian lawyers have initiated litigation, and sometimes there's a time when it's important to initiate litigation so as to bring to the fore more important things that may have been forgotten.
Yes.
or may have been set aside deliberately.
Okay.
So Christian lawyers can be involved in that. They can either initiate litigation themselves or participate in litigation or actively in court or perhaps in a supportive role.
Okay.
Yeah, and that happens.
Supposing the initiative has been taken by somebody else, is it possible for the Christian Lawyers Fellowship to, be enjoined in that and participate and bring on board, like you say, some of the issues that need to be considered?
Yes, yes is the answer. That there are provisions in law where one can come into court as amicus curiae, a friend of the court. Now, of course, you can't just walk in. You must make an application, and the court has to be satisfied that you have a legitimate and genuine concern and a legitimate and genuine interest in the matter, and that you can then bring to the attention of the court, not to necessarily any of the parties, but to the attention of the court, a dimension in the litigation which the court could easily not think about or deal with, because the parties it's adversarial, so the parties always push their side, and it's quite possible that when two opposing parties pushing their respective sides can forget or indeed just ignore a very important aspect of it, which the court ought to take into account.
Yes.
And since the court doesn't by itself come up with ideas, you might need an amicus curiae to come to court, apply, come in, and then push aside or put forward a view that the others may not necessarily put forward.
Okay, which then means that if there are considerations in a particular case that, say, Mwananchi feel, this needs to be part of the conversation, they can actually approach the Christian Lawyers Fellowship and ask them, can you please, on our behalf, put this on the agenda? Yes,
and I think we ought to make it very clear that people need to do this, because already we have NGOs who do that.
Yes.
NGOs who, with a particular agenda, seek to be joined in certain litigation and then propound or support a particular view. And sometimes views are not necessarily the right views.
Yes.
But there are views that might be trending. And that's why I think Christian lawyers must be, must take interest in what's going on.
Yes.
And must be able to stand ready to support any Mwananchi who might feel that perhaps an aspect of the litigation is not being considered.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's always a threat of violence hovering above our election period during campaigns, after results have been announced, and in some areas it's more common than others. And the word on the streets is that this violence is usually sponsored. Are these sponsors of violence above the law?
I think the answer is no. The sponsors of violence are not above the law. But having said that, I think we have to look at the whole picture. I think we have sufficient laws to deal with any kind of breaches of the law in this country. Of course, we could have more laws. What we don't have is the will to enforce a law. I do not think we have a culture of, speaking for myself, at least from what I have seen in my short life, I don't think we have a culture of obedience to the law.
Yes.
People only comply with the law when it's enforced. There isn't an inherent intention or willingness to comply with the law. And so I think that's where the problem is. It's not that there are not enough laws and to enforce against people or in connection with people who are breaching that law. We have them, but we do not have the will to enforce them. And when we do, we enforce them selectively. And that is a major difficulty. And I would hope that, I may say this, but perhaps that is because we do not have an independent civil service. See, when you have an independent civil service which functions regardless of who's in power, and it runs on the basis of regulations and laws that have been put in place, and it doesn't curry favor. If we did have that, and to a certain extent we do, but to a large extent we don't, if we did do that, then we would see that people who actually sponsor violence are dealt with in accordance with the law. And there should be no reason why anyone should say that we are being targeted because of a particular political view. And also, we should be very careful that we do not target people for their political views. But we should not resile or even hesitate to enforce the law simply because people say that they are of one area or another.
Is there a way to change this culture? Is there a way that, for example, the Christian Lawyers Fellowship, being people whose bread and butter, so to speak, is matters of law, is there a way that that culture of disobedience to the law can be changed into, a culture of obedience?
I think there is. But I think first of all, I think we really must confront the truth. And that is that we've gone down that road of disobedience and lack of concern for the law for so long that it's not just a habit anymore, it's a stronghold. And it's a stronghold it has taken society. I mean, you can see how the way we drive. People drive, driving on the wrong side of the road quite happily. And in fact, if you stop them, they get very angry. So I think what the Christian lawyers need to do, and in fact they have, in my view, the upper hand in doing, is that they do not just seek to get people to comply with the law. Because as I said earlier, complying with the law is the minimum. I think the greater requirement of people to comply with the moral dictates of the law. Because the law can only say so much, but the moral aspect is far much greater. It means people have to change their minds. We have to change people's hearts. The law never changes people's hearts. And that's why Christian lawyers become so important, because their hearts are changed by the Lord Jesus, and and it's their hearts that they're pushing forward. It's the mind of Christ, so to speak, that they should. And I think that we can do, and we should be able to do it rigorously and consistently, because we ourselves must be able to demonstrate that in the way we do things, in the way we carry out our profession as lawyers, that there is a difference when a Christian lawyer articulates a position in law, there ought to be a difference. And I think that's a challenge to all of us.
Yes.
That we must be able to project the mind of Christ, even in the things that we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, well said. Well said. The ordinary voter sometimes may not be in a position to do something about, you know, what they see is an illegal practice in the election process. Is there a place that they can go and safely report? Because a lot of times it's the fear, you know, of I may end up being victimized for pointing this out. Is there a safe way for them to do this?
Safe way? Well, I suppose theoretically I think there is, in the sense that any voter or any person doesn't even have to be a voter. Any citizen can make a complaint or make a report regarding any election malpractice or something they can make a report to the police station.
Yes.
They can make a report to any electoral official, and they, of course, can also do it to the IEBC. The fact, of course, is that it's much more difficult to do that because once you go to a police station and you're treated very shabbily, they say, okay, write down. You're treated as if you are the miscreant or the criminal. So there has to be, really, we have to change our police stations to have a desk that deals with specific complaints.
Yes.
Just like I think there has been an attempt to create a desk where battered women can go and be attended to in a manner that allows them to speak, so that people are not afraid to go and make these reports. In the same way, there ought to be a desk, specific desk, to do that. Then also in IBC and other electoral officials, there ought to be, but they're quite often so busy doing the humdrum stuff of the election that just to receive a complaint is a major distraction a lot of the time. So I think it really does require the creation of a mechanism which allows any people who have a complaint to make a complaint and feel that their complaint will be looked at.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope that somebody is listening and will do something about
Well,
that.
certainly hope so.
The 22 elections around the corner in a matter of weeks. What would be your advice generally to voters, but also particularly to Christians who will be voting?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, to Christians, I would say that I think we should vote. I think it's tragic if we would sit back and watch what's happening and not vote. A lot of us feel that it doesn't really matter what my vote does. That in any case, I've only got one vote, so even if I didn't vote, it does make a difference. Well, it does make a difference. Apart from anything else, you vote not so much to bring somebody into office, which you do by your vote, but you have to vote as an expression of a viewpoint. You vote to express your opinion or your views or your conviction about what's going on. You may have a raft of candidates who don't meet what you think is your view of the best candidate, but you still must vote. I think it's a duty, not just a state duty, it's a duty as a Christian. That's one thing. But I think it's also important that you don't vote on the basis of the propaganda that you see around you. And so it means that you and I as Christians must seek to educate ourselves as to what are the issues really.
Yes.
Because unfortunately at a time like this, the issues disappear.
Yes.
And people begin to use other methods to win the public. And they go for the easiest thing, which is evil.
Yes.
Evil always sells. And, you know, it's easier to abuse somebody than to praise them, particularly if they are your opponent.
Yes.
And it's very easy for us to fall for that kind of thing. We fall for the kind of evil and abuse and misguided notions and misrepresentations that are put forward. We don't bother to look beyond that or to look at some of the things that are being said and to assess them for their veracity or whatever. And I think that's a Christian voter must do that. And that's why I think, and I'm so glad that you have this, because it's a window and it allows many people to begin to ask questions about the electoral and political environment in which they are at the moment. And I think Christian lawyers ought to try and educate people so that people can begin to vote or can go to vote with some idea of what the issues are, how we ought to deal with it. So I think one of the things that they ought to do is vote, certainly. Yes. Then it's not just what they ought to do, it's also what they ought not to do.
Yes.
And I think we as Christians ought not to pass on misinformation and disinformation. We ought not to be participants in the creation of ethnic animosity. You know, ethnic animosity is not natural.
Yes.
It's something that's created, and I think we ought not to try and avoid that.
Yes.
And to speak against anyone who seeks to project that. I think we must do that. It's not just what we do, but also what we avoid doing.
Yes.
And I think it's important, particularly as we run towards the election now. You can see the temperatures are very high.
Yes.
And people are willing to do anything.
Yes.
There's vote rigging already sort of goes on. There's a lot of bribery going on. And as Christians, we must not only speak against it, but we might not participate in it.
Yes.
And be very clear about it. I suppose there are many other things that we could very well be doing, but those are the things that sort of springs immediately to mind.
Okay. I particularly like that, you know, what you said about the Christian Lawyers Fellowship, being engaged, you know, beyond the political campaign period and beyond the immediate post-election period, being available, you know, for the citizens to have a voice in any kind of legislation, excuse me, that's done, you know, like throughout, not just, you know, in relation to elections. So I think that's very helpful information to have. What would be your parting shot to those who are listening and, you know, thinking about all these legal things that are going on?
Well, my parting shot, I suppose, would be that, first of all, as Christians, we really must pray for this country. And we must pray that the right leaders come into office. That we must do. And we must do that relentlessly, consistently. Because I think unless the Lord's hand is on this country, we can go very badly off. And we are not special. We've seen what other countries can go through. And we've been through a very dark chapter in our country. And so we must pray. That's the first thing I think we all have. Whether we're Christians, or whether we're lawyers or not lawyers, or whatever we are, I think as long as we're Christians, I think we should pray that the Lord will bring into office men and women of integrity, and men and women who are really concerned about the society and about the community. And we must pray, in my view, against people who will come in for self-aggrandizement, basically trying to loot the coffers of the public. I think we really must pray against it, in my view. And I think also that we must participate in discussions such as this and others, Bible study groups, whatever. I think we must participate. We must try and talk to people about, because the fact is that we have a raft of candidates, and not all of them are good candidates. And I think I think we mustn't shy away from saying that really this candidate, in my view, is not right, because you set up the reasons, but those reasons must not be just out of propaganda or out of ethnicity or out of, no, they must be really based on principle, talking about integrity and things like that. I think we must, as a run-up towards the election, do so. Then I think we must speak peace and seek to engender peace, and make sure that people are thinking a peaceful engagement in all this. Because one gets the impression sometimes that there is almost a sense of emergency around. And I think we must tone that down. We must be able to help people to tone it down and help people to realize that this is not the end of the world. It's an important activity, yes, but it's not the end of the world. And we must participate in bringing up a peaceful resolution, peaceful solutions to all the difficulty issues that are, and not just be part of the kind of invective that one sees sometimes in public discourse. I think that would be my parting shot. Vote peacefully. Seek to get people to know that peace is the most important one, and to think as Christians. When the Lord says to us, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives unto you. Let not your heart be troubled." So let not be fearful. Let's seek to be peaceful, but knowing also that that peace comes from the Lord.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for the wisdom that you have shared. And all the best as you continue to work together with your colleagues who are believers in the legal fraternity. And our prayers that God will continue to open doors for you to be able to positively impact the nation, not just during elections, like you said, but just throughout the life of the society.
Amen to that.
Amen. Thank you for joining us in Inform Kenya in this edition where we were talking matters legal, and a lot of things have been said, and I pray that we will take them to heart. Remember the challenge that has been set: pray and vote. But above all, remember that the Lord is the one who's the supreme Lord and supreme judge over this nation. God bless you.